key part of building a successful Google News site and getting accepted into Google News is recruiting writers. Now, some people have attempted to write all of their own articles, but this is not, in fact, what Google is looking for when it accepts sites, because Google is looking for a news organization made of multiple writers who typically write for a living, although you can get by with some who don't. And that brings us to the question of exactly what kind of writers are you looking for. And at the beginning, you're certainly looking for people who are willing to write under their own names and provide a photograph of themselves and a short biography that would include some information perhaps about their education and their writing experience or the things that they enjoy doing or writing about. And often it's better to try to find people who write for a living. Now, this isn't always the case. There are some people who do it as a hobby and they're quite consistent and good at it. But those who write quite regularly and consistently, you'll find, will be good resources for you in the future, because they'll have a higher quantity of output as well as good quality in many cases. One thing I've discovered over time recruiting a lot of different writers is that there are some people around the world who have very special situations. They often live in low-cost countries, but they may actually be Westerners who speak English as a first language and have good writing skills, but they're in a situation where they simply don't need or even necessarily want to be paid very much. They may be in other situations where they live in the USA or the UK or South Africa or Australia, but they just enjoy writing and they want their names to be recognized in a formal publication. And some of those people really don't charge much for their services. Now, you have to sift through a lot of low quality writers and a lot of people who want to be a writer but don't have any experience and perhaps don't write very well, in order to find those who are in these special situations. But I can promise you that there are a good number of people out there that write very well and will give you articles for a very low price. I have used all of the following sites at one time or another to recruit writers from. And these sites vary in the quality of writers, and certainly they vary in the cost of writers. Freelance.com is usually the lowest cost source for writers, and so when you place a project on Freelancer, you can expect to get a lot of people who perhaps do not have good English skills but write at a low cost. But what I found even on Freelancer is that you will find good writers at a low cost. You just have to sort them out from those who are not. Other sites like Elance, Odesk, and People Per Hour, particularly People Per Hour, often have very, very high-priced writers. These are, in some cases, writers who have been journalists for a long time and may be employees of or freelancers for very distinguished news organizations, and they may want lots and lots of money to write for you. On the other hand, in each of these sites, you occasionally will find people who have a good resume, a good CV, and will write for you at a low cost. Forums.digitalpoint.com, that's just a place that you could advertise your need for writers, and you often get a lot of feedback, and occasionally you get a good consistent writer from that site as well. So when you advertise on one of these sites that you need writing help, here are a couple of things that you can remember. You need to make it clear that you're looking for news articles. We've mentioned this a number of times in the course. Google doesn't want editorials, opinion, encyclopedia-like blogging type articles, how-to articles, those kinds of things. And the majority of people who write on the internet write exactly those things. They don't write news generally, and so you have to make it very clear that you want news and news only, and you can say things like I want news in a journalistic style and those kind of things, just to make your intentions clear. So when you advertise, when you put your little project description together, which will be probably just 2 or 3 paragraphs, you also want to say exactly how many articles you're looking for, how long they should be, and something about the general topics, because the writers will want to know what topic areas you're interested in. If you have a general news site, for example, and you're just populating it initially, then I would say I would want at least 500 word articles, and the articles can be in any of the typical news categories like politics, world, travel, entertainment, sports, technology, science, those kinds of categories. But of course, the categories that you advertise need to be the ones that you've included in your website. One useful technique in regards to your budget is to go ahead and tell them up front that you'll award the projects to people who bid $30 or $40 or whatever you want, and just say that they should state in their bid how many articles they will provide you for $30, for as an example. And I'll give you a little secret later on. I'll expand on it more, but the secret is this, that you really are looking for more writers at this point than you are for more articles, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. You'll need to, of course, state the quality requirements for the articles. The minimum things is it has to have perfect grammar and perfect spelling, and there can be no plagiarism. And as we said earlier, the writers need to be willing to write under their own names and provide a pic and a bio. That's part of what they deliver to you as part of the project that they're bidding on. So if they're not willing to do that, then you don't want them. Okay, and here's the tip repeated again: more writers, not more articles. And most writers who apply for your positions are hoping that they'll get full-time jobs with you and get a lot of work, but at least initially that is not what you'll be looking for to populate your news site. Initially you're trying to build up your staff, where you can put as many writers as possible on their staff page who are real people who've provided articles for your publication. It's good if you can actually have more writers with fewer articles each at the beginning, because as you move forward with your site, you'll have a pool to choose from for any of your writing needs in the future. And the more writers you can find initially, the higher the chances that you'll be able to find people who can work for you on an ongoing basis, and people who kind of are in the correct career and life situation to work for you in a good way. And what I mean by that is this, that if you recruit 10 writers, for example, initially, some of them are going to be too expensive to use on an ongoing basis. So up front, for the first couple of articles they provide for you, you may be willing to pay $15, $10, or $15, or $20 for their articles. But ongoing, you just simply will have a hard time being profitable at that level of cost. In fact, you wouldn't be profitable at all, in my experience. Some of the writers that you get will be in your own time zone, and some will be in other time zones. Frankly, if you live in the United States, it's really useful to have writers in other time zones, and perhaps Europe or South Africa or Australia or other English-speaking countries that are not in U.S. time zones, because then you can send them assignments, or they can write news during their daytime hours, and then that news can be ready to be published Eastern time in the United States. And in my experience, there are a lot of readers in the early hours of the morning in the U.S. and then through noon. And so if you can have your articles published by 7 or 8 a.m. in the morning, preferably 7 a.m. in the morning, then you get a lot of traffic. Now that, you know, that's not hard and fast. There is evidence that you can publish at other times during the day and without too much impact on traffic numbers, and some people haven't seen any at all. But in the initial analysis that I did a long time ago, that's the kind of volume I was seeing was primarily early in the morning and then over noon, and then it drops in the afternoon and then picks up again in the evening. So because Google doesn't keep your articles at the top of the list for long, what you need to do is decide what hours of the day you want your articles to be prominent in Google, and try to map that up with the times that you think that your readers are going to be reading the most. So all of that to say that if you can find some writers in a time zone that's different than your own, it may actually work to your advantage. Some of the people that you recruit may not be willing to write under pen names, and some will have no problem with that. So it would be good on an ongoing basis to have the flexibility to write under either their own names or under pen names. And of course, you'll get some people who are very busy and can only write 1 or 2 articles a day, and then you'll have others who either are quite prolific and are fast writers, or simply are not as busy and have more capacity. On an ongoing basis, when you're operating your site and you need to produce a lot of articles, it's good to have a few writers who can crank out a lot of articles so that you're not having to communicate with as many writers to achieve the same number of articles. Here are some writing guidelines. You can have other ones, but this is just kind of a sample of guidelines that we give to writers that we hire, and we have a minimum length of articles, and we typically on an ongoing basis require a minimum of 250 words for articles. Early on in our process, when we're applying to Google, we have a minimum of 500 words, and we like longer articles ongoing as long as we can afford them and be profitable. When writers begin to use words like I, we, you, us, them, often it means that they've kind of strayed from a strict news format and are starting to talk about their own experience, or perhaps write opinions, and so those are red flags to us, and we tell writers don't use those words. And that's because of number 3, don't write how-to, editorial, or opinion pieces. Now, of course, you may be saying to yourself, well, there are editorials and opinion pieces in all of the major newspapers. And that's correct. You can have editorial or opinion pieces as long as you clearly mark them as such. And the second thing is that large news organizations like the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal can get away with a lot of things because Google is never going to desyndicate them. So they can essentially write about whatever they want, but the smaller guys who are just starting out in the news business need to be more careful about the kinds of things that they publish, because if someone complains about the smaller newspaper, Google is much more likely to desyndicate them than someone complaining about a larger newspaper who's been established for a long time. Keyword stuffing is a problem. Many writers on the internet, bloggers, and so on have kind of been trained over the years that it's good to put a lot of keywords into the article content. So in other words, if they're writing about a particular kind of television that just came out, they might repeat that television model name all through their article. This is something that you shouldn't do in news articles. You should use the word when it sounds good to use it naturally. And that applies, except in the title, you need to intentionally put important keywords in your titles. Let me give you an example. You would not want to have an article titled "A new television is introduced by Sony," because there is no good keyword there. The keywords are Sony and TV, but those are very, very broad search terms. It would be much preferable to have the actual model name, maybe not the model number, but as much of the model name as what someone might typically search for on Google to be in the title. So you can't leave your titles too generic in Google News and expect to get very much traffic. You want to have keywords in the titles. On the other hand, you do have to be careful. You don't want to make your title sound unnatural. So the right balance is to put keywords in the title, but to make it sound as natural as possible to someone who's scanning through the news, and you want to have very interesting titles. While we're talking about writers and guidelines for writers, this is one of the things that challenges writers the most. Even good writers often do not write enticing, compelling, interesting titles. And writing a good title is a skill that needs to be developed. And you may not have that skill yourself at first, but once you begin to read titles and see which titles attract traffic, then you'll start to get the feeling for what makes up a good title. Clearly, the keyword is for search engines, and it's important that there's keywords in the titles at this stage in the game. But you also want to write for the readers and have interesting sounding titles that will attract them to click on your articles. We mentioned earlier that any images that are part of the articles need to be in JPEG format. It's a Google technical requirement. And of course, the basics, that grammar and spelling must be perfect. There can be no plagiarism. We try to put titles in what we call proper title case, and I'll include elsewhere in the documentation with this course a website that actually checks your title case or reformats it for you. Essentially, proper title case means that the important words in your title are capitalized, and the smaller words like and or and those kinds of words remain uncapitalized. As we've mentioned before, quoted material is okay as long as the quotes were given to the public, for example in a press release or in a quote made on television or in a public forum of some kind. But if there was a quote that was provided to someone other than directly to the writer himself, for example a quote that occurred in a private interview between a journalist and the person being interviewed, then that quote is not fair game to use in your article unless you cite where the quote came from and who the quote was given to.